Rain hammered the glass walls of Seoul Central Hospital when Dr. Kael Vesper, the most feared man in Asia's criminal underworld, watched his pregnant wife collapse to the floor beneath another man's shadow. The stranger standing over her wore a smirk that promised violence, his hand raised like he owned her. But Leora Vale no longer belonged to the man who once destroyed her. She belonged to the king who would burn the world to keep her safe. One encounter, 3 years of buried trauma, and a reckoning no one would survive intact. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, and let's dive in. Mauritian. The emergency room doors of Seoul Central Hospital burst open at 2:13 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that smelled like disinfectant and blood. Leora Vale stood at the nurse's station filling out discharge paperwork when the chaos erupted. Security shouting in Korean, paramedics wheeling in a gurney carrying a man bleeding out from a stab wound that looked deep enough to kill him before sunrise. She didn't hesitate. While the senior nurses scrambled and the attending physician barked orders in rapid-fire Korean that Leora only half understood, she grabbed gloves and moved toward the trauma bay. Her hands were steady, even though her 6-month pregnant belly made every movement awkward. Fear didn't register. Not anymore. She'd spent the last year learning how to survive alone in a foreign country where she barely spoke the language, working night shifts at a hospital that paid just enough to cover rent in a shoebox apartment that leaked when it rained. Survival left no room for panic. The man on the gurney was unconscious, his face pale beneath dark hair matted with sweat and blood. Expensive suit, custom shoes, the kind of details that told a story even before anyone spoke. Leora cut away his jacket while the trauma surgeon worked to stabilize the wound. Blood soaked through gauze faster than she could replace it. "Pressure here," the surgeon snapped in English, nodding toward the man's abdomen. Leora pressed down hard. The man's breathing was shallow, erratic. She counted each breath while monitors beeped warnings around them. Outside the trauma bay, security guards stood like statues, their faces blank but their eyes tracking every movement inside the room. "Who is he?" Leora asked quietly. The surgeon didn't answer, just kept working with hands that moved too fast, suturing layers of muscle and tissue with the kind of precision that came from practice. Too much practice. 2 hours later, the man was stable. Barely. Leora's shift ended at 6 a.m., but she stayed. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way his hand had twitched when she first applied pressure to the wound, a reflexive grab for life that reminded her too much of her own desperation. Maybe it was the silence in the ICU, the way no family members appeared to wait outside his room, even though men in dark suits filled the hallway like sentries. She sat beside his bed and wiped dried blood from his face with a damp cloth. His eyes opened just after dawn. Gray eyes. Cold at first, scanning the room with the alertness of someone accustomed to waking up in danger. Then those eyes found her, and something shifted. Confusion, maybe surprise. "You stayed," he said. His voice was rough from intubation. "Someone had to," Leora answered. He studied her for a long moment, took in her scrubs, her tired face, the ID badge clipped to her pocket that identified her as an American transplant working in obstetrics. "You're not from here," he said. "Neither are you." She'd heard him speak English in the ambulance before he lost consciousness. American accent, West Coast maybe. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Kael Vesper. Leora Vale. Leora. He tested the name like he was tasting something rare. "Thank you." She nodded and stood to leave, suddenly aware that she'd crossed some invisible boundary by staying past her shift to sit with a stranger, but his voice stopped her before she reached the door. "Can I see you again?" The question hung in the sterile air between them. Leora's first instinct was to say no. She'd learned the hard way that men who asked questions like that usually wanted something in return. But when she turned back to look at him, she saw something unexpected in those gray eyes. Vulnerability, raw and unguarded. "Maybe," she said. It was the most honest answer she had. 3 years before that moment, Leora had been a different person entirely. Young, naive, drowning in a relationship with a man named Nolan Graves, who spent 2 years systematically destroying every good thing she believed about herself. They'd met in Portland during her nursing program, back when she still thought love was supposed to feel like safety. Nolan was charming at first, ambitious, articulate, the kind of man who knew how to make you feel like the center of his world. Then the center started shrinking. It happened slowly. Little comments about her weight, her career choices, the friends she spent time with. He never yelled, never hit her, but he hollowed her out with precision, one cutting remark at a time, until she started believing that surviving meant earning his approval. She paid for their apartment, worked double shifts to cover rent while he focused on his startup, convinced herself that supporting him was love. When she finally discovered she was pregnant, she made the mistake of telling him. Nolan stared at her like she'd just ruined his life. "You did this on purpose," he said, calm, cold. "You knew I didn't want kids. I didn't. Get rid of it." The words hit her like a slap. Leora stood in the kitchen of the apartment she paid for, holding a positive pregnancy test, and realized she'd been sleeping next to a stranger for 2 years. "No," she said. It was the first time she'd ever refused him anything. Nolan threw her out that night, packed her belongings into garbage bags and left them on the sidewalk, told her she could come back once she fixed the problem. Leora never went back. She stayed with a coworker for 3 days, then found a nursing contract in South Korea that came with a signing bonus large enough to cover a plane ticket and first month's rent. The hospital needed English-speaking staff for their international patient wing. It was temporary, survival-based, desperate. She boarded the flight alone, 6 weeks pregnant, with 2 suitcases and no plan beyond making it to the next day. Seoul greeted her with rain and neon lights that reflected off wet pavement like fractured glass. The city was massive, indifferent, beautiful in a way that made her feel invisible. For the first few weeks, she cried herself to sleep in her tiny apartment while traffic noise filtered through paper-thin walls. Everything felt foreign. The language, the food, the subway system that moved too fast for her to understand. But invisibility turned out to be a gift. No one knew her history here. No one expected her to shrink. The other nurses were kind but distant, giving her space to figure things out. She worked long shifts and learned to navigate the city alone, her pregnant belly growing rounder while Seoul slowly transformed from hostile to familiar. By month 5, she stopped crying. By month 6, she started believing she might actually survive. Then Kale Vesper walked into her life bleeding from a stab wound. Sadet. He started appearing outside the hospital after her shifts, not every night, just often enough that Leora began to expect it. He'd wait by the main entrance in his black overcoat, hands in pockets, looking like someone who had all the time in the world, even though she knew men in expensive suits didn't wait in the rain without a reason. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said the 3rd time she found him there. "I know," Kale answered. "Come have dinner with me." "I'm pregnant. I noticed. I'm also exhausted, broke, and about to be a single mother in a country where I barely speak the language." "Then you probably need a hot meal." She laughed despite herself. It was the first real laugh she'd managed in months. "You're persistent. Only when it matters." They went to a small restaurant near the hospital that served kimchi jjigae in stone pots that burned her tongue. Kael ordered in fluent Korean, then translated the menu for her while steam rose between them. They didn't talk about the stabbing, didn't talk about why men in suits still watched him from across the street. Instead, they talked about small things. How Leora missed American coffee. How Kael grew up in Los Angeles before business brought him to Seoul. How strange it felt to build a life in a language that didn't belong to you. "What kind of business?" she asked. Kael smiled. It was a careful smile, the kind that revealed nothing. The complicated kind. She should have pressed, should have asked harder questions, but exhaustion and loneliness made her willing to accept easy answers. They had dinner 3 more times that week. By the 2nd week, Leora stopped pretending she wasn't looking forward to seeing him. Kale was different from Nolan in ways that terrified her. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. Paid attention to the things she liked without making a show of it. Started bringing her decaf coffee with the right amount of cream, remembered she hated cucumbers, never made her feel guilty for being tired or pregnant or scared. One night he drove her home after her shift and walked her to the door of her apartment building. Rain fell in sheets around them, turning the street into a river of reflected neon. "Thank you," Leora said. Kale looked at her like he was memorizing her face. "I want to keep seeing you." "Why?" "Because you stayed." She didn't understand what he meant until later, after he'd driven away and she was lying alone in her apartment staring at the ceiling. Men like Kyle, powerful, dangerous men, lived in a world where everyone wanted something from them: money, status, protection. But Leora had stayed beside his hospital bed because it was the right thing to do, not because she expected anything in return. She'd given him something rare: kindness without conditions. By month 7 of her pregnancy, Leora realized she was falling in love with a man whose last name she'd Googled exactly once before terror made her close the browser. The search results had been vague, but damning. Business magnate, real estate developer, philanthropist, all the sterile corporate language that said nothing and everything at once. But the articles that didn't appear in official news sources told a different story. Whispers about underground networks, political leverage, the kind of power that didn't show up on tax returns. Cale Vesper wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous. She should have run, should have ghosted him, changed her number, requested a transfer to a different hospital. But every time she decided to end things, he'd show up outside the ER with soup, or a warm coat, or that rare smile that made her feel like she was the only person in the world who mattered. "I need to know what you do," she said one night while they sat in his car overlooking the Han River. City lights sparkled across dark water like fallen stars. Cale was quiet for a long time, long enough that Leora thought he might lie. "I run a network of businesses," he said finally. "Some are legal, some exist in gray areas. I facilitate deals between people who can't meet in boardrooms. I solve problems that don't have legal solutions." "You're a criminal." "Yes." The honesty shocked her. No deflection, no justification, just the truth delivered like a gift he was trusting her to hold. "Why are you telling me this?" Leora asked. "Because you deserve to know what you're getting into before you decide." "Decide what?" Cale turned to face her fully. His expression was serious, almost gentle. "Whether you want me in your life, in your daughter's life." Leora's hands rested on her swollen belly. The baby kicked against her palm like a reminder of everything at stake. She thought about Nolan, who'd promised safety and delivered poison. Then she thought about Kael, who'd been honest about danger from the start. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "I know. I'm scared." "You should be." They sat in silence while rain started falling again, drumming against the windshield. Leora watched the city through blurred glass and tried to reconcile the man beside her with the life she'd been trying to build. Simple, safe, predictable. Kyle reached over and took her hand. His palm was warm, solid. "I will never lie to you," he said quietly. "I will never make you smaller to feel bigger. And I will never let anyone hurt you or your daughter." It was the promise Leora needed without knowing she needed it. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? I'm choosing you." Kael pulled her close and kissed her forehead, his breath warm against her skin. She felt him tremble slightly. This man who commanded empires and made people disappear, shaking because someone finally chose him back. Leora gave birth to her daughter on a freezing January morning while sleet hammered against hospital windows. Kael was there. He held her hand through 18 hours of labor, didn't flinch when she screamed at him, and cried openly when the doctor placed a tiny, wailing baby girl against Leora's chest. "She's perfect," he whispered. Leora was too exhausted to speak. She just held her daughter and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not breaking, but expanding, making room for love bigger than fear. They named her Mira. Kael's world was already dangerous, but becoming a father made him lethal in new ways. He disappeared for 3 days after Mira's birth, and when he returned his knuckles were bruised and his expression was colder than Leora had ever seen. "What did you do?" she asked. "Made sure no one will ever threaten her." She didn't ask for details. Some things were better left in darkness. The next 6 months blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the strange domesticity of building a family with a man who still ran a criminal empire from their penthouse apartment. Kael would take business calls in 3 languages while bouncing Mira against his shoulder. Leora would come home from hospital shifts to find him asleep on the couch with their daughter sprawled across his chest. They never talked about marriage. Until one night when Mira was 8 months old and Leora was folding laundry in the living room, Kael walked in and knelt in front of her swollen feet. She'd been on her feet all day, with the kind of seriousness that made her heart stop. "Marry me," he said. Not a question, a statement, a certainty. Leora stared at him. Why? Because I choose you, every day, and I want you to choose me back, legally, permanently. You don't need marriage for that. No, KL agreed, but I want it anyway. She thought about all the reasons to say no. His world, the danger, the secrets she'd never fully understand. Then she thought about the way he looked at Mira like she was made of starlight, the way he touched Leora like she was precious, the way he'd kept every promise he'd ever made. Yes, she said. They married 3 weeks later in a private ceremony that blended Korean tradition with modern elegance. Crimson silk, winter sunlight, Mira sleeping through the vows in Kael's mother's arms. Leora wore a simple white dress and felt more certain than she'd ever felt about anything. When Kael slipped the ring onto her finger, his voice was steady. You were never hard to love. Those words broke something loose inside her chest. For the first time in her life, Leora believed it. The first year of marriage was complicated and beautiful in equal measure. Kael's business required travel, late-night meetings, and the kind of conversations that ended when Leora walked into the room. She learned not to ask too many questions, learned to recognize the different kinds of silence he carried home, the productive kind after successful deals, the dangerous kind after betrayals. But he always came home, always called when he said he would, always kissed her like she was the only real thing in his world of shadows and violence. And slowly, Leora stopped feeling like a visitor in Kael's life and started feeling like a partner. She met his inner circle, the people who actually ran operations. There was Jin Soo, his head of security, a woman in her 40s with scars on her hands and eyes that missed nothing. Marcus, his financial strategist, who looked like a college professor but could launder money through 17 countries before lunch. And Hana, his second-in-command, who spoke 4 languages and once broke a man's arm for underestimating her. They circled Leora like wolves at first, assessing whether this American nurse was a weakness Kael couldn't afford. She's pregnant again, Hana said bluntly during a meeting Leora accidentally walked into. That makes her vulnerable. That makes me more dangerous, Kael corrected. Touch her, and I'll burn everything you love to the ground. Hana smiled. Good answer. After that, they accepted her. Not as an equal. Leora had no interest in running criminal operations, but as someone worth protecting. They taught her how to spot surveillance, which exits to use in crowded places, how to recognize when someone's energy shifted from curious to threatening. You're building an army, Leora said to Kael one night. I'm protecting my family, he corrected. By the time she entered her second trimester, Leora had stopped feeling scared and started feeling powerful. Not because she was dangerous, but because she understood exactly how dangerous the people around her were. And they'd chosen to aim that danger away from her. Mira turned 2, started speaking in mangled sentences that mixed Korean and English, learned to wrap Kael around her tiny finger with a smile that mirrored his own rare expressions of joy. Life became normal, beautiful, ordinary in ways that still felt miraculous. Then Leora returned to Seoul Central Hospital for a routine prenatal checkup, and the past came back with teeth. She saw Nolan Graves standing in the hospital corridor before he saw her. 3 years. It had been 3 years since he'd thrown her out of their apartment, since he'd told her to fix the problem, since she'd boarded a plane alone and built an entirely new life across the ocean. Leora's first instinct was to turn around, leave, pretend she hadn't seen him, but Nolan looked up and recognition flooded his face. Leora. His voice hadn't changed, still carried that same condescending edge, like he was surprised she'd managed to survive without him. She forced herself to keep walking, one hand instinctively moving to protect her pregnant belly. Nolan. He stepped into her path, too close, blocking the exit without actually touching her. The old tactics. What are you doing here? I live here. In Seoul? He laughed. It was an ugly sound. Jesus, you really ran away. I moved. There's a difference. His eyes dropped to her belly, then to the expensive ring on her finger. His expression shifted. Surprise, then something darker. You got married. Yes. Let me guess. Some desperate guy who needed a green card? The insult landed exactly where he intended. Leora felt old shame trying to claw its way back up her throat, that familiar voice whispering that Nolan was right, that she wasn't worth choosing, that any man who stayed with her was settling. But then she thought about Kyle, about the way he looked at her, about Mira, about the life she'd built from nothing. "You need to move," Leora said quietly. Nolan didn't move. "You look good. Pregnant again, though?" He smirked. "Hope you learned how to keep a man this time." The words hit like poison. 3 years of healing unraveled in seconds. Leora felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller, that old survival instinct kicking in that said the safest thing to do was apologize, accommodate, disappear. "I'm trying to leave," she said. "So leave." But he still didn't move. Other people in the corridor were starting to notice. Nurses watching nervously, a security guard taking a step closer. "Get out of my way," Leora said louder. "Or what?" Nolan leaned in, his voice dropping. "You gonna call your husband? Let him know you needed saving again? That you're still the same pathetic—" He didn't finish. Leora stumbled backward to get away from him, and her heel caught on her own bag. She felt herself falling, both hands moving instinctively to shield her belly, the world tilting sideways. She hit the floor hard. Pain exploded up her spine. Someone screamed. Nolan stood frozen above her, his face registering shock. And for one terrible second, Leora was back in Portland, back in that apartment, back to being nothing. Then a voice cut through the chaos like a blade wrapped in velvet. She was never the one who needed saving. The corridor fell silent. Leora looked up and saw Kyle standing at the end of the hallway in his black overcoat, rain still dripping from his shoulders. His expression was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came before violence. And behind him, Jinsu and 4 other security agents blocked every exit. Nolan turned slowly. His face went white. Because he finally understood that the woman he'd once destroyed now belonged to the most dangerous man in Seoul. And Cale Vesper looked at Nolan Graves the way predators look at prey. Kyle moved through the hospital corridor like winter itself had taken human form, silent, inevitable, lethal. His footsteps made no sound against the polished marble, but every person in the hallway felt his approach the way animals sense storms before the sky darkens. Nurses pressed themselves against walls. Patients in waiting room chairs stopped mid-conversation. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim around him. Leora remained on the floor where she'd fallen, one hand still protecting her swollen belly, the other braced against cold tile. Her breath came in short gasps, not from pain, though her spine throbbed where she'd landed, but from the sudden vertigo of watching 2 versions of her life collide. Nolan stood frozen 3 feet away, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally raw terror, as Kyle stopped beside Leora and knelt without breaking eye contact with the man who'd made her fall. "Did he touch you?" Kale's voice was soft, almost gentle, the kind of softness that preceded broken bones. Leora's throat was too tight to speak. She shook her head. "The baby? I don't know." Her voice cracked. "I don't think." Kale's hand found hers and squeezed once. Then he stood, rising to his full height with the kind of controlled grace that came from years of calculated violence. He still hadn't looked away from Nolan. "What's your name?" Kale asked. Nolan's mouth opened, closed. His hands were shaking badly enough that he shoved them into his pockets to hide it. "This is a misunderstanding. I asked for your name." The temperature in this corridor dropped 10 degrees. Jinsu had moved to block the nearest exit, her hand resting casually on something beneath her jacket. 2 other security agents flanked the opposite end of the hallway. No one was getting out until Kyle decided they could leave. "Nolan," he finally stammered. "Nolan Graves." "Nolan." Kale tested the name like he was memorizing it for later use. "You know my wife?" It wasn't a question. Nolan's eyes darted to Leora, then back to Kyle. We used to date. Years ago. I didn't know she was married. I swear, I didn't know you made her fall. It was an accident. She tripped. You were standing in her way." Kale took 1 step closer. Just one. But Nolan flinched like he'd been struck. "You blocked her path, refused to move when she asked, then watched her collapse while protecting my child." The last 3 words carried enough weight to crush bones. Nolan's face had gone gray. Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. "Look, man, I don't want trouble. I'll leave. We're done here." "We're done when I say we're done." A doctor appeared at the edge of the scene, taking in Leora still on the floor, the armed security agents, and Kyle standing over Nolan like an executioner sizing up his next job. The doctor was smart enough to understand the hierarchy immediately. "Mrs. Vesper," he said carefully, addressing only Leora. "Let's get you examined. Make sure the baby's okay." Cale turned finally, his attention shifting from Nolan to the doctor. "I want a private room, no residents, no students, just you." "Of course." Jinsu moved forward to help Leora stand, her grip firm but surprisingly gentle. Leora's legs felt unstable, adrenaline still flooding her system in waves that made her hands tremble. She let herself be guided toward the examination rooms, but couldn't stop herself from looking back at Nolan. He looked smaller than she remembered, weaker. 3 years ago, he'd seemed so powerful, his opinions the only truth that mattered. Now he just looked like a man who'd finally met someone more dangerous than his own cruelty. Kyle caught her looking. His expression softened fractionally when their eyes met, something almost human flickering behind the cold calculation. Then he looked back at Nolan, and the humanity vanished. "Don't move," Kale said. "We're going to have a conversation." The way he said conversation made it sound like a death sentence. The examination room was sterile and too bright. Leora sat on the paper-covered table while the doctor checked her blood pressure, listened to the baby's heartbeat, and pressed carefully along her spine where she'd landed. Every touch made her wince, not from physical pain but from the lingering sensation of Nolan's voice in her ears. "Hope you learned how to keep a man this time." Jinsu stood by the door, silent and watchful. She was a small woman, barely 5'4", but carried herself like someone who'd forgotten how to be afraid. Scars ran along her knuckles, the kind that came from punching things that punched back. "Baby's heartbeat is strong," the doctor said, pulling the stethoscope from his ears. "No signs of distress. You're going to have some bruising on your lower back, but nothing that concerns me medically." Leora nodded mechanically. The relief felt distant, muffled. "I want to keep you for observation," the doctor continued. "Just a few hours, standard precaution after a fall." "No." Leora's voice came out harder than she intended. "I need to go home. My daughter." "Mira is with Mrs. Chen," Jinsu said quietly. Mrs. Chen was their live-in nanny, a woman in her 60s who'd raised 3 sons and treated Mira like a grandchild. "She's safe." Leora wanted to argue, but exhaustion crashed over her like a physical weight. She'd been running on adrenaline since the moment she saw Nolan, and now that the immediate danger had passed, her body was demanding payment for the sprint. 2 hours, she conceded. "Then I'm leaving." The doctor nodded and left, probably grateful to escape whatever situation was unfolding in his hospital. Jinsu remained, silent stretched between them. Leora stared at her hands, still trembling slightly, and tried to organize the chaos inside her head. 3 years. She'd survived 3 years without thinking about Nolan more than a handful of times, built an entire life that had nothing to do with him, and in under 5 minutes, he'd dragged her back to Portland, back to that apartment, back to feeling worthless. "Who is he?" Jinsu asked. "My ex-boyfriend. The one who threw you out." It wasn't a question. Of course, Kyle had told his inner circle. Of course, they knew every vulnerable piece of her history. That was how survival worked in their world. No secrets, no surprises, no blind spots that enemies could exploit. "Yes," Leora said. "He's the father? Of Mira? No." The denial came automatically. "He told me to get rid of the pregnancy. I left instead." Jinsu was quiet for a moment, processing. "Does he know about Mira?" "I don't think so. He didn't mention her." "Good." Jinsu shifted her weight, and Leora caught the subtle movement of her checking the weapon beneath her jacket. "Kael's going to handle this." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they made Leora's stomach twist. "What does that mean?" Jinsu met her eyes with an expression that gave away nothing. "It means you don't have to worry about him anymore." "I don't want anyone dead." "No one's going to die." Jinsu said it like she was commenting on the weather. "But he's going to wish he had." Leora wanted to push back, demand details, insist that violence wasn't the answer, but part of her, the part that still remembered Nolan's voice, still felt his shadow blocking her path, wanted exactly what Jinsu was promising. She hated that part of herself. Hated that 3 years of healing could be unraveled so easily. I thought I was over it, Leora said quietly. Trauma doesn't work like that. I know, but I really thought I'd moved past needing to be scared of him. Jinsu moved closer, her expression softening fractionally. You're not scared of him. You're angry. There's a difference. Leora looked up. Is there? Fear makes you small. Anger makes you dangerous. Jinsu smiled then, just barely. And right now, you're the most dangerous person in this hospital. How? Because Kyle would burn Soul to the ground if you asked him to. The truth of that statement sat between them like a third presence in the room. Leora had always known Kyle was dangerous, had seen glimpses of it. The cold way he ended phone calls, the silent efficiency of his security team, the way powerful men deferred to him without question. But she'd never fully understood the scope of it until now. She'd married a man who could erase people, and part of her wanted him to. Bah! Kale found Nolan in a private conference room on the hospital's administrative floor. He'd had Jinsu's team escort him there under the pretense of sorting out the incident, official enough that hospital security wouldn't interfere, vague enough that Nolan couldn't refuse without admitting he had something to hide. The room was small, windowless, a table and 4 chairs. Marcus stood in the corner taking notes on his tablet like this was a business meeting. Another security agent blocked the door from the inside. Nolan sat at the table trying very hard to look calm. Failing. Kyle took the chair directly across from him and spent a full minute saying nothing, just looking, studying this man who'd once had the power to destroy Leora's sense of self-worth with carefully chosen words. He looked ordinary, weak chin, soft hands, the kind of man who'd learned to weaponize insecurity instead of confronting his own mediocrity. You're going to tell me everything, Kyle said finally. About what? Your relationship with my wife. Nolan shifted uncomfortably. Look, that was years ago. We dated for a while. It didn't work out. We moved on. That's it. She didn't move on. She ran away. That's not how it happened. Kyle leaned back in his chair, the picture of patience. Then tell me how it happened. Nolan's eyes darted toward the door, calculating. The security agent met his gaze with complete indifference. We were together for 2 years, Nolan started, his voice defensive. I was building a startup. She was in nursing school. It was fine at first, but then she got clingy, wanted more attention, started talking about marriage and kids when I'd been clear that wasn't what I wanted. Keep going. She got pregnant. Nolan said it like an accusation. Claimed it was an accident, but I think she did it on purpose, trying to trap me. Kale's jaw tightened fractionally. Marcus stopped typing and looked up with an expression that suggested he was witnessing someone dig their own grave with impressive efficiency. So you told her to get an abortion, Kyle said. Statement, not question. I told her I wasn't ready to be a father, that if she wanted to keep it, she was on her own. Then you threw her out. She left on her own, after you packed her belongings into garbage bags and put them on the sidewalk. Nolan went very still. How did you... She told me. Kale's voice remained perfectly level. Told me everything. About the 2 years you spent convincing her she was worthless. About how you controlled her money, isolated her from friends, made her believe that surviving meant earning your approval. That's not... She's exaggerating. Leora's always been dramatic. Kale moved fast enough that Nolan flinched backward, his chair scraping against tile. But Kyle only placed both hands flat on the table between them, leaning forward just enough to close the distance. Don't, Kale said quietly. Don't lie about her to my face. The room temperature seemed to plummet. Marcus had his phone out now, probably recording. Documentation. Evidence. The kind of insurance that kept people in line. Nolan's breathing had gone shallow. What do you want from me? I want to understand what kind of man sees a pregnant woman and decides cruelty is the appropriate response. I was 25. I was scared. I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes. Kyle straightened. You made choices. Calculated ones. You knew exactly what you were doing when you made her pay rent while you focused on your startup. You knew what you were doing when you mocked her career, when you isolated her from support systems, when you convinced her that needing basic human decency was asking too much. Nolan's face had flushed red. You don't know anything about our relationship. I know she got on a plane alone, 6 weeks pregnant, and chose to build a life in a country where she didn't speak the language rather than spend another day under your roof. Kale's eyes were flat, empty. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Silence settled like dust. Nolan tried one more time to find solid ground. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry things ended badly, but that was years ago. I've moved on. She's clearly moved on. There's no reason for this to be. You haven't moved on. What? You tracked her down. Kale pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. On the screen was a photo of Nolan standing outside Seoul Central Hospital 3 days ago, taken by one of Jinsu's security cameras. You've been watching her. Nolan's face went gray again. I'm in Seoul for a conference. Medical technology. I'm a sales rep now. It's a coincidence. There are 12 hospitals in Seoul that host medical technology conferences. Kael's voice remained conversational, almost bored. None of them are at Seoul Central. Your conference is across the city at the Grand Hyatt, but you visited this hospital 4 times in the past week, always during morning hours, always near the prenatal clinic. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nolan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I wasn't stalking her. I just wanted to see if she was okay. You wanted to see if she was still broken. The accuracy of the statement hit like a punch. Nolan's expression crumpled, defensive anger collapsing into something uglier, pettiness, jealousy. The bitter resentment of a man who'd thrown something away and discovered too late that it was valuable. She looks happy, Nolan said, voice tight. Rich husband, nice ring, pregnant again. Must be nice to land on your feet like that. She didn't land on her feet. Kale's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She clawed her way up from the hole you dug for her, worked night shifts while 7 months pregnant just to afford rent in a shoebox apartment, learned a new language alone, gave birth in a foreign country with no family, no support, nothing but sheer fucking will to survive. And then she met you. Nolan's tone carried acid now. Lucky her. Found another man to take care of her. The smile that crossed Kael's face was genuinely terrifying. You think I take care of her? He laughed once. Sharp. Humorless. She saved my life before she knew who I was. Stayed beside my hospital bed because it was the right thing to do, not because she wanted something from me. She chose to build a life with me knowing exactly what I am, knowing the danger, the violence, the consequences. That's not luck. That's courage. Kael stood, buttoning his jacket with mechanical precision. You're going to leave Korea tonight, he said. There's a ticket waiting for you at Incheon Airport. Business class. I'm generous like that. Nolan stared at him. And if I don't? Then tomorrow morning, every person at your company receives detailed documentation of your harassment patterns. The pattern of control and emotional abuse. The way you've tracked Leora across continents. The restraining order she's going to file will be approved before lunch. I'll fight it. You'll lose. Kael's smile widened fractionally. Because I own 3 judges in family court, and my legal team has successfully argued 247 cases without a single loss. Your career ends. Your reputation ends. Everything you've built since Leora left evaporates. He let that sink in for a moment. But that's option 2, Kael continued. Option 1 is simpler. You leave tonight. Delete her contact information. Never search for her again. Never speak her name. Never return to Seoul. And in exchange, you get to keep your comfortable little life selling medical equipment at conferences. Nolan's hands were shaking again. You can't just... I can. Kael checked his watch. Your flight leaves in 4 hours. Marcus will drive you to collect your belongings from your hotel. You'll have 30 minutes. Then you go to the airport. This is insane. This is mercy. Kael's expression went cold again. You should take it. The finality in his voice left no room for negotiation. Nolan looked at Marcus, at the security agent by the door, then back at Kael, searching for any crack in the armor, any weakness to exploit. He found none. Fine, Nolan said, voice hollow. I'll leave. Smart choice. Kael walked toward the door, then paused, turned back. One more thing. If you ever come near my wife again, if you so much as Google her name, I won't give you options. I'll just end you, quietly, permanently, in a way that ensures no one ever asks questions. He said it the same way someone might comment on the weather. Then he left. Leora was still in the examination room when Kael returned. The doctor had cleared her medically, but insisted she rest for another hour. Jinsu had stepped out to coordinate security details, leaving Leora alone with her thoughts for the first time since the confrontation. Those thoughts were not kind. She kept replaying the moment on the floor, the humiliation of falling, the instinctive fear when Nolan stood over her, the shame of feeling small again after years of believing she'd grown into someone stronger. The door opened. Cale stepped inside, and the carefully neutral expression he'd been wearing since the hospital corridor finally cracked. He looked tired, older, the weight of controlled violence sitting heavy on his shoulders. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey." He crossed the room and sat on the chair beside the examination table, reaching for her hand. His palm was warm, solid, real. "Baby's okay?" he asked. "Fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine." The words came out mechanical, rehearsed. Cale studied her face with the intensity of someone reading a language only he understood. "You're not fine." Leora tried to smile. Failed. "I thought I was over him. Over all of it. 3 years, Kyle. 3 years, and he still managed to make me feel like I was back in Portland. Back to being nothing." "You were never nothing." "I felt like nothing." The distinction seemed important somehow. Cale squeezed her hand but didn't argue. Didn't offer empty platitudes about strength or moving forward. He just sat with her while the hospital hummed around them. Distant announcements over intercoms, footsteps in hallways, the mechanical beep of monitors from other rooms. "What did you do to him?" Leora finally asked. "Gave him a choice." "What kind of choice?" "The kind where he walks away and never comes back." Leora wanted details. Wanted to know exactly what threats Kyle had made, what leverage he'd used, how permanent the solution was. But another part of her didn't want to know. Didn't want to be complicit in whatever darkness Kyle had deployed to protect her. "Is he hurt?" she asked instead. "No." "Scared?" "Terrified." "Good." The word came out before she could stop it. Vicious, satisfying. Cale didn't look surprised. "You're allowed to be angry." I thought I'd forgiven him, or at least moved past needing to care what he thought. Forgiveness doesn't mean amnesia. Cale's thumb traced circles on her palm. You can build a life beyond someone's damage without erasing the fact that they damaged you. Leora leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaustion finally overwhelming adrenaline. "How do you do this?" "Do what?" "Live with all this violence, all these threats and consequences. How do you not let it poison everything good?" Cale was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something Leora had rarely heard from him: vulnerability. "I compartmentalize," he admitted. "Probably better than I should. The things I do in business, the decisions I make, the people I hurt, I keep them separate from this. From you, from Mira, from the parts of my life that matter. But they're not separate. They can't be." "No," he agreed. "They're not. And someday that's going to cost us something." The honesty hit harder than comfort would have. Leora lifted her head to look at him. "Do you regret it? Marrying someone like me? Someone who doesn't fit in your world?" Kael's expression shifted. Surprise, then something fiercer. "You're the only thing in my life I don't regret." "But I'm weak." "You're not weak." He said it with absolute certainty. "You survived an emotionally abusive relationship, escaped to a foreign country while pregnant, built a life from nothing, chose to stay with me even after learning what I am. That's not weakness. That's the kind of strength most people never find." Tears burned behind Leora's eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to cry. "I fell apart the second I saw him." "You had a panic response to trauma. That's normal. Normal doesn't feel strong. Strength isn't the absence of fear." Kael cupped her face with both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "It's choosing to keep going even when you're scared. You did that. You chose me. Chose this life. Chose to be a mother. Those are the hardest choices anyone can make." Leora kissed him then. Hard, desperate, trying to pull something solid from the chaos still spinning inside her head. Kael kissed her back with the kind of careful intensity that made her feel precious instead of fragile. When they broke apart, she was crying after all. "I hate that he still has power over me," she whispered. "He doesn't." "Then why do I feel like this?" "Because healing isn't linear. Kale wiped tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. You're allowed to have bad days. You're allowed to fall apart. That doesn't erase everything you've built. The words settled into her chest like stones. Heavy, true. They sat in silence for a while longer, Leora's head against Kael's shoulder, his arms wrapped around her like a fortress. Outside, Seoul continued its endless rhythm. Cars honking, people rushing, the city moving forward whether anyone was ready or not. Eventually, Jin-soo returned with an update. Nolan had been escorted to his hotel, collected his belongings under supervision, and was currently en route to the airport. The surveillance team would confirm he boarded the flight. He's gone, Jin-soo said simply. Leora nodded. It should have felt like closure. It felt like unfinished business. They went home 3 hours later. Mira was asleep when they arrived, curled up in Mrs. Chen's lap while cartoons played silently on the television. The nanny looked up with concern when she saw Leora's face, too pale, eyes still red from crying, but didn't ask questions. That was the thing about people in Kael's orbit. They understood when silence was more valuable than curiosity. Kael paid Mrs. Chen double and sent her home in a car service. Then he carried their sleeping daughter to bed while Leora stood in the living room of their penthouse apartment, staring out at Seoul's glowing skyline. The city looked different tonight. Less beautiful. More indifferent. Kael returned and found her still standing there, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold broken pieces together. Come to bed, he said gently. I'm not tired. Liar. She almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she turned to face him. What if he comes back? He won't. But what if... Leora. Kael crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. He won't come back. And if he does, he won't leave alive. That's not a threat. It's a promise. The words should have horrified her. They didn't. That realization sat heavy in her chest. She'd married a man capable of murder, and instead of fear, she felt protected. Safe. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. I don't know who I am anymore, she admitted into his chest. You're my wife. Mira's mother. A woman who survived hell and came out stronger. I don't feel stronger. You will. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, while the city hummed 40 floors below. Eventually, exhaustion won. Kael guided her to their bedroom and helped her change into pajamas with the patient care of someone undressing a child. She let him. Let herself be taken care of. Let herself be weak just for tonight. She fell asleep curled against him, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, feeling their second daughter kick lazy patterns against her palm. But her dreams were full of hospitals and corridors, and Nolan's voice telling her she'd never learned how to keep a man. She woke up at 3 a.m. shaking. Kael was already awake, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. I'm here, he murmured. You're safe. Leora wanted to believe him, but some part of her, the part that remembered Portland, that remembered being thrown out with garbage bags, that remembered believing she deserved it, whispered that safety was temporary, that someday the past would demand payment for all the years she'd spent running from it. And 3 floors below their penthouse, in the building's parking garage, a car sat with its engine running. Inside, one of Jin-soo's security team watched the building's entrance on 6 different camera feeds, logging every person who entered or exited, because Nolan Graves had boarded his flight, but his luggage had been left behind at the hotel. And men who left their belongings behind were usually planning to come back. The call came at 4:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes after Leora finally fell back asleep. Kael's phone vibrated against the nightstand with the specific pattern that meant emergency. 3 short bursts, silence, then 3 more. He was out of bed before the second set finished, pulling on pants with one hand while answering with the other. Talk, he said quietly, already moving toward the hallway so his voice wouldn't wake Leora. Jin-soo's voice came through clipped and professional, but Kael caught the edge underneath. Nolan Graves didn't board the flight. Security footage shows him in the departure area, but he never went through the gate. He disappeared into a service corridor 20 minutes before takeoff. Kael's jaw tightened. Where is he now? Unknown. We've got teams checking hotels, but he's not using his credit cards. Phone's off. It's like he planned this. He did plan it. Kael moved to the window overlooking Seoul's pre-dawn skyline. Lights glittered like broken glass scattered across dark fabric. He left his luggage behind. You knew? I suspected. Men like him don't let go of things they think belong to them. Silence on the other end while Jin-Soo processed that. What do you want us to do? Find him. Use every resource we have. Street cameras, facial recognition, informants in the expat community. I want to know where he's sleeping, who he's talking to, and what he's planning. And if we find him? Kael's reflection in the window looked carved from stone. Bring him to me. He ended the call and stood there for a long moment, watching the city slowly wake up. Traffic beginning to move on distant highways. Office buildings illuminating floor by floor as cleaning crews worked through their shifts. Seoul was a machine that never fully stopped, just shifted gears between day and night. Behind him, a floorboard creaked. Kael turned to find Leora standing in the bedroom doorway, wearing one of his t-shirts, her pregnant belly stretching the fabric. Her hair was tangled from sleep, and her eyes carried the hollow look of someone who'd spent too many hours fighting nightmares. "What's wrong?" she asked. Kael considered lying, decided against it. They'd built their marriage on brutal honesty, even when honesty cut deep. "Nolan didn't leave," he said. The color drained from Leora's face. She gripped the doorframe hard enough that her knuckles went white. "What do you mean he didn't leave?" "He made it to the airport, got past security, then disappeared before boarding." "Where is he?" "We don't know yet." Leora's breathing went shallow, rapid. The beginning of a panic attack Kael had seen before, after she woke from nightmares, or when unexpected sounds startled her in crowds. He crossed the room quickly and pulled her against his chest, one hand on the back of her head, the other spread across her spine. "Breathe," he said quietly. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." She tried, failed, tried again. Her whole body was shaking. "He's going to come after me," she whispered. "No. You don't know that. He won't get near you." Kael's voice was iron. "I have 30 people looking for him right now. Every camera in Seoul is being monitored. Every hotel, hostel, and short-term rental within 50 kilometers. He can't hide." "Then why hasn't he been found?" It was a fair question. One Kael didn't have a good answer for yet. "He had help," Kael said finally. "Someone coached him, told him how to disappear." Leora pulled back to look at him, fear shifting into something sharper. "Who would help him?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." What? By 7 a.m., Kael's entire operation had shifted into crisis mode. His penthouse office, a room that usually hosted business calls and contract negotiations, transformed into a command center. Monitors covered one wall displaying security feeds from across the city. Jin-Soo coordinated 3 separate teams from a laptop on the conference table. Marcus worked his network of informants, making calls in 4 different languages. Even Hana had flown in from Busan, her expression grim as she reviewed footage from Incheon Airport. Leora sat on the couch near the window with Mira curled in her lap, both of them wearing yesterday's clothes. Mrs. Chen had been called back early and now stood guard in the kitchen, her usually warm demeanor replaced by something colder, protective. "Airport security is cooperating," Hana reported without looking up from her screen. "They've isolated the service corridor Nolan used. It's an employee-only area, requires a keycard." "He had access," Kael said. "Or someone gave it to him." Jin-Soo pulled up new footage on the main monitor. "Here, 9:17 p.m. yesterday. Watch the man in the blue jacket." The video showed a crowded terminal. Nolan stood near a coffee kiosk, phone in hand, looking nervous. Then another man approached. Asian, mid-30s, wearing maintenance worker coveralls and carrying a tool bag. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge each other. But the maintenance worker set his bag down near Nolan's feet, picked up a different bag that looked identical, and walked away. 30 seconds later, Nolan picked up the first bag and headed toward the service corridor. "Dead drop," Marcus said. "Professional." Kael studied the maintenance worker's face. "Facial recognition?" "Running now." Jin-Soo typed rapidly. "But I'm betting it's a burner identity. This was planned." "By who?" Leora's voice cut through the technical discussion. She'd been silent until now, just holding Mira and trying not to fall apart. Who would help Nolan? Everyone in the room turned to look at her. The question hung in the air like smoke. "Someone who wants leverage against me," Kael said finally. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. Kael had enemies, but then dozens of them. Rival operations who'd love nothing more than to find a weakness in his armor. But most of them were smart enough to know that going after his family would start a war nobody could win. Unless someone thought they could win. Unless someone believed Kyle had gone soft. We need to consider this might be a distraction, Hannah said quietly. She was watching Kyle with the expression of someone who'd known him long enough to read between silences. Pull your resources toward finding one angry ex-boyfriend while something bigger moves in the background. Kyle had considered that, had spent the last 3 hours running through scenarios and contingencies, trying to see the shape of whatever was coming. But every instinct he'd honed over 15 years in this world told him this was personal, not strategic. Someone wasn't trying to destroy his empire. Someone was trying to destroy him. Keep looking, Kale said. I want updates every 30 minutes. Jinsu nodded and returned to her screen. Marcus made another call. Hannah pulled up building blueprints of structures near the airport, and Leora sat on the couch holding their daughter, watching her husband coordinate a manhunt with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, which, she realized, he probably had. By noon, they had nothing. Nolan Graves had disappeared into Seoul like smoke into fog. No credit card activity, no phone pings, no facial recognition hits from the thousands of cameras scanning the city. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. He's being sheltered, Jinsu said during the midday briefing. Professional safe house, probably outside our usual surveillance radius. So we expand the radius, Kale replied. That'll take days, maybe weeks. Then we take days. But even as he said it, Kyle felt the clock ticking. Every hour Nolan stayed hidden was an hour he could plan, coordinate, reach out to whoever was backing him. And every hour was an hour Leora spent looking over her shoulder, flinching at shadows. She'd taken Mira to the playroom around 10 a.m., probably to escape the tense atmosphere in the office. Mrs. Chen stayed with them. So did 2 security agents who looked like they could break concrete with their bare hands. But security had diminishing returns. You could put guards on every door, cameras on every angle, protocols in place for every scenario. And still someone determined enough would find a crack, would wait for the one moment when attention drifted, when timing aligned, when luck favored violence over protection. Kyle had spent his entire adult life being that someone. He understood exactly how vulnerable they were. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost declined it, then recognized the area code. Portland, Oregon. He answered. Yes. Mr. Vesper? A woman's voice. American accent. Professional. My name is Detective Sarah Chen with Portland PD. I'm calling regarding an incident involving Nolan Graves and one of your employees. I don't have employees in Portland. I apologize. I meant your wife, Leora Vale. Kale's entire body went still. What about her? Mr. Graves filed a police report 3 days ago claiming Mrs. Vesper has been stalking him. He's requesting a restraining order. The room tilted sideways. Jinsu and Marcus both looked up, registering the change in Kale's expression. Hannah stepped closer, hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. That's absurd, Kale said carefully. My wife hasn't been in the United States in over 3 years. I understand that, and frankly, the report raised several red flags. But Mr. Graves provided what appears to be extensive documentation. Social media messages, photos, email correspondence, all dated within the last 6 months. Fabricated. Most likely, yes, but he's also filed complaints with the State Department claiming Mrs. Vesper fled the country to avoid a custody dispute regarding their child. The words hit like bullets. They don't have a child together, Kale said, voice dangerously quiet. According to his documentation, they do. A daughter named Mira. The world stopped. Everything. The monitors, the team, the security footage playing on endless loop, all of it faded into white noise. Kale could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel rage building in his chest like a pressure vessel about to explode. That, Kale said with lethal precision, is my daughter. I understand this is complicated. No, you don't understand. Mira is my biological daughter. My wife left the United States before she and I met. Nolan Graves has no legal claim, no biological connection, and no right to file anything. Then you'll need to provide documentation proving that. Birth certificates, paternity tests, custody agreements. We live in Korea. Mira was born here. Everything is filed with Korean authorities. Which is why I'm calling Mr. Vesper. Mr. Graves is claiming international parental kidnapping. If he escalates this through the proper channels, It could trigger an investigation by both US and Korean authorities. I wanted to give you a heads up before that happens. Kale closed his eyes, forced himself to breathe, to think through the rage. This was the play. Not violence, not direct confrontation. Legal warfare. Bureaucratic chaos. The kind of fight where Kale's usual tools, money, influence, controlled violence, had limited effectiveness. Because courts moved slowly and investigations required cooperation. And allegations like this would put Leora under a microscope she couldn't survive. Thank you for the warning, Kyle said. I'll have my legal team contact you directly. I appreciate that. And Mr. Vesper, off the record? Yes. This whole thing smells wrong. Mr. Graves is too prepared, too organized. Someone's coaching him through this. I know. He ended the call and stood there holding his phone, staring at nothing while his mind reorganized reality around this new threat. Jinsu spoke first. What happened? Kyle looked at her, at Marcus, at Hana, his inner circle, the people who'd helped him build an empire on violence and strategic leverage. Nolan filed a police report claiming Leora's been stalking him, Kyle said flatly. He's also claiming Mira is his biological daughter and that Leora kidnapped her to Korea. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus recovered first. That's insane, easily disproven. We have medical records, birth certificates, which will take weeks to authenticate through international channels. And during those weeks, Leora will be under investigation, possibly unable to leave Korea, possibly facing extradition requests if Nolan pushes hard enough. He can't actually win this, Hana said. He doesn't need to win. He just needs to make our lives hell. Kyle set his phone down with careful precision. This is the leverage. Keep us tangled in legal proceedings while whoever's backing him makes their real move. Then we find him faster, Jinsu said. Force him to drop the charges. It's too late for that. The report's already filed. The investigation's already started. Kale ran both hands through his hair, the gesture rare enough that everyone in the room understood how badly this had destabilized him. We need to tell Leora. Nobody argued. Leora was sitting cross-legged on the playroom floor building a tower out of wooden blocks with Mira when Kyle found her. Their daughter was concentrating intensely on placement, her small tongue poking out between her lips in the universal expression of childhood focus. She looked so much like Kyle, it was almost painful. Same dark hair, same serious expression, same careful deliberation before making decisions. And Nolan was claiming she was his. Leora looked up when Kyle entered, read his face immediately. What happened? Mira, Kale said gently. Go find Mrs. Chen. Ask her for a snack. Their daughter looked between them, sensing adult tension she was too young to understand. But she was also 2 years old and the promise of snacks trumped curiosity. She toddled out of the room trailing her favorite stuffed rabbit. The moment she was gone, Leora stood. Tell me. So Kyle told her, explained the phone call, the false report, the allegations about stalking and parental kidnapping. He watched her face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally something worse than anger, terror. He's trying to take her from me, Leora whispered. He won't succeed. You don't know that. You can't promise that. She was backing away now, hands pressed against her mouth. If there's an investigation, if authorities get involved, if they think I kidnapped... You didn't kidnap anyone. Mira is legally your daughter. We have documentation that will take weeks to verify while I'm under investigation. While some social worker decides whether I'm fit to be a mother. While Nolan sits in Portland telling lies about how I stole his child. Leora's voice was climbing toward hysteria. They'll believe him. They always believe the man. They'll think I'm crazy, that I'm lying, that I... Leora. Kale crossed the room and grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. I will not let that happen. You can't control this. Watch me. But even as he said it, Kyle felt the foundation shifting beneath him. This was a different kind of war, one where his usual weapons were dulled, where money and influence could only buy time, not victory. Leora saw it in his eyes, saw the uncertainty he was trying to hide. He's going to win, she said quietly. He's going to take everything. No. Yes. She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. This is what he does. He finds your weakness and he pushes until you break. And my weakness is her, is them. Her hand moved to her pregnant belly. If he can't have me, he'll destroy me. That's who he is. Kale wanted to argue, wanted to promise absolute protection, but he'd spent 15 years in a world where promises were currency and lies were survival, and he refused to lie to his wife. We're going to fight this, he said instead. Every resource I have, every connection, every favor owed. We're going to bury him. And if that's not enough? The question hung between them. Before Kyle could answer, Jinsu appeared in the doorway. Her expression was carved from ice. We found him, she said. Nolan Graves was staying in a small apartment in Itaewon, Seoul's international district. The building was old, unremarkable, the kind of place where expats on tight budgets rented month to month without questions. Third floor, window facing an alley. No cameras, no security. Almost too easy. It's a trap, Hana said during the tactical briefing. Probably, Kyle agreed. We're walking into it anyway. Jinsu pulled up building schematics on her tablet. 3 exits. Fire escape on the east side. Service entrance in the basement. Main lobby entrance. We can cover all of them with 6 people. Use 8. I want redundancy. And you? I'm going in through the front door. Marcus looked up from his laptop. That's stupid. It's direct. It's going to get you killed. Not if whoever's behind this wants me alive. Kyle checked his watch. 6:30 p.m. The sun was setting, painting Seoul in shades of gold and shadow. They went through all this trouble to draw me out. They're not going to shoot me in a hallway. You don't know that. No. But I know they want something. And the only way to find out what is to talk to them. Hana shook her head slowly. You're letting emotion override strategy. That's how people die. Then I die. Kale's voice was flat. But I'm not letting this continue. Not with Leora pregnant. Not with Mira in danger. Not with some faceless enemy pulling strings and thinking they can touch my family without consequences. He looked at each of them in turn. His inner circle. The people who'd followed him through wars, both literal and figurative. If something happens to me, Kyle said quietly, you protect them. You get Leora and the kids somewhere safe. You make sure whoever's behind this regrets ever learning my name. Jinsu's expression hardened. Nothing's going to happen to you. But if it does, we'll handle it. That was as close to a promise as she could make. They left the penthouse at 7 p.m. Leora watched from the living room window as Kyle's convoy pulled out of the underground garage, 3 black SUVs moving through traffic with practiced precision. She'd wanted to come, had argued, pleaded, demanded, but Kyle had been immovable. You stay here with Mira, he'd said. Let me handle this. What if you don't come back? He'd kissed her then, hard and desperate, his hands cupping her face like he was trying to memorize the shape of her. I'll come back, he'd promised. Now she stood alone in the living room of their penthouse fortress, one hand pressed against the window glass, watching taillights disappear into Seoul's arterial flow. Behind her, Mrs. Chen was putting Mira to bed. Security agents were posted on every floor. The building was locked down tighter than a military installation, and Leora had never felt more vulnerable in her life. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Korean area code. She almost didn't answer, then recognized the prefix as Seoul Central Hospital. Hello? Mrs. Vesper? A woman's voice. Korean accent. Nervous. This is Nurse Park from the prenatal clinic. I'm calling because your test results came back and Dr. Kim wanted to discuss them urgently. Leora's blood went cold. What test results? From your examination yesterday, after your fall. There were some irregularities in your blood work that require immediate follow-up. What kind of irregularities? I'm not authorized to discuss details over the phone. Dr. Kim needs to see you in person. Can you come in tonight? Every instinct Leora had developed over 3 years of living in Kyle's world started screaming warnings. This felt wrong. Timed wrong. Convenient wrong. I'll call tomorrow to schedule. Mrs. Vesper, this is urgent. Your pregnancy may be at risk. The words hit like a physical blow. Leora's hand moved instinctively to her belly, feeling her daughter kick against her palm. How urgent? She asked. Dr. Kim recommended immediate monitoring. Can you come now? Leora looked around the penthouse. Security everywhere. Kale gone. No way to reach him without pulling him away from whatever confrontation was unfolding across the city. I'll need to bring security, she said. Of course. We'll be waiting. The call ended. Leora stood there holding her phone, trying to think through the fear, trying to separate legitimate medical concern from orchestrated threat. The baby kicked again. Harder this time. Leora made her decision. The hospital was quieter at night. Fewer patients in the waiting area. Fewer staff moving through corridors. The prenatal clinic on the 4th floor was nearly empty, just one nurse at the desk, who looked up when Leora entered, flanked by 2 of Jinsu's security team. "Mrs. Vesper?" The nurse stood quickly, too quickly. "Dr. Kim is waiting for you in examination room 3. The security agents exchanged glances. One of them, a man named Chen, who'd been with Kael's organization for 6 years, stepped forward. "We'll need to clear the room first," he said in Korean. "Of course." They moved down the hallway, Chen taking point while his partner covered their rear. Leora followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything felt wrong. The empty corridors, the nervous nurse, the urgent call perfectly timed to arrive when Kael was occupied. But the baby kept kicking, and fear for her unborn daughter overrode every other survival instinct. Examination room 3 was at the end of the hall. Chen pushed the door open slowly, one hand on the weapon beneath his jacket. The room was empty. No doctor, no equipment, just a standard examination table and a metal chair. "Where's Dr. Kim?" Leora asked the nurse who'd followed them. "He'll be right in. Please, sit down." Chen shook his head. "We're leaving." "But the doctor isn't here." Chen grabbed Leora's arm. "Mrs. Vesper, we need to go. Now." They turned back toward the hallway. Nolan Graves stood in the doorway. He wasn't alone. 4 men in dark suits flanked him, all carrying weapons that weren't even bothering to hide. Professional. Military-bearing. The kind of security that came with serious money and zero conscience. "Hello, Leora," Nolan said. He looked different than he had in the hospital corridor. Calmer. More confident. Like he'd finally found solid ground. "We need to talk." Chen's weapon cleared leather, but one of the suited men moved faster. There was a brief struggle, a muffled impact, and Chen crumpled to the floor unconscious. His partner lasted 3 seconds longer before joining him. Leora backed against the examination table, both hands protecting her belly. "Don't. I'm not going to hurt you," Nolan said. "That was never the plan." "Then what is the plan?" Nolan stepped into the room. Behind him, his security team secured the door. The nurse had vanished, probably an actress hired for this specific role. "The plan," Nolan said slowly, "is for you to understand how badly you fucked up when you chose him over me." "I didn't choose him over you, I chose myself." "No, you ran away. Stole my child. Built a life with a criminal." Nolan moved closer, close enough that Leora could smell his cologne, the same expensive brand he'd worn in Portland. "But that life ends tonight. Kael will kill you. Kael is occupied." Nolan smiled. It was genuinely terrifying, empty of everything except cold satisfaction. Right now, he's walking into an apartment in Itaewon where absolutely nothing is waiting for him except evidence that I was never there. He'll realize the mistake too late, and by then, you and I will be on a plane to the United States. Leora's vision swam. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice. I'll fight, and risk your baby?" Nolan glanced at her pregnant belly. "I don't think so. You're too practical for that, too careful." He was right. Leora felt the truth of it settling into her chest like stones. She could scream, fight, refuse, but Nolan had prepared for every contingency, had backup, had leverage, had calculated every possible response. And Kael was across the city chasing a ghost. "Who's helping you?" Leora asked. "Buying time, trying to think through the panic. Someone who wants your husband destroyed." Nolan gestured toward the door. "Come on, we have a tight schedule." "No." "Leora, oh, no." She straightened her spine, forcing herself to look directly at the man who'd once convinced her she was worthless. "You're going to have to drag me out of this hospital. Make a scene. Alert every security camera and witness between here and wherever you think you're taking me. And when Kael finds out, and he will find out, he'll tear this city apart looking for me. He'll find you. And whatever protection you think you have won't be enough." Nolan's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering behind his calculated confidence. "You used to be scared of me," he said quietly. I used to be a lot of things. Leora's hands were shaking, but her voice held steady. Now I'm just angry. For a moment, she thought he might back down, might recognize that the woman standing in front of him wasn't the same person he'd destroyed 3 years ago. Then one of his security team stepped forward and pressed a chloroform-soaked cloth against her face. Leora tried to fight, tried to breathe, tried to scream. The world dissolved into chemical darkness. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was Nolan's voice, distant and distorted. She was always too stubborn for her own good. Consciousness returned in fragments, pain first. Sharp and immediate in her wrists were zip ties cut into skin. Then cold. Metal beneath her cheek, industrial air conditioning raising goosebumps along her arms. Then sound. Distant traffic, the hum of machinery, voices speaking Korean somewhere above her. Leora forced her eyes open. She was lying on a concrete floor in what looked like a warehouse. Shipping containers stacked against walls. Exposed ductwork overhead. One flickering fluorescent light casting shadows that moved like living things. Her pregnant belly pressed uncomfortably against the ground. And when she tried to shift position, white-hot pain exploded through her abdomen. The baby. Terror cut through the chloroform haze faster than anything else could. Leora rolled onto her side with agonizing slowness, both hands moving to her stomach. She felt movement. A kick. Weak, but present. Relief made her dizzy. "She's awake!" Nolan's voice came from somewhere behind her. Leora twisted her neck to look and found him standing 20 feet away with 3 of his security team. They'd changed locations. This wasn't the hospital, wasn't anywhere she recognized. "Where am I?" Her voice came out hoarse. Chemical burned. Inchinport District. Nolan walked closer, hands in his pockets, like they were having a casual conversation. "There's a private airstrip 2 kilometers from here. We leave in 40 minutes. Leora tried to sit up, failed. Her hands were bound behind her back, and the angle made everything harder. "Kyle will find me. Kale thinks you're safe at home." Nolan crouched down to her eye level. "By the time he realizes you're missing, we'll be over the Pacific. My security team are dead." The words hit like a physical blow. Leora thought about Chen, about his partner whose name she'd never learned, about how they'd been trying to protect her when Nolan's people had taken them down. "You murdered them," she whispered. "I didn't. But yes, they're dead. Necessary casualties." Nolan's expression was empty of remorse. "This is what happens when you marry a monster, Leora. Violence follows. People die. And eventually, the monster loses everything he tried to protect." "You're the monster." "No, I'm just a man taking back what's mine." Leora's laugh came out bitter and broken. "I was never yours. You were until you ran away." Nolan stood, looking down at her with something that might have been pity if pity wasn't predicated on caring. "But that ends tonight. We're going back to Portland. You're going to recant every lie you told about me. Admit you manipulated the situation. Admit Mira is my daughter. She's not. Legally, she will be once the paternity test I've arranged confirms it." Leora's blood went ice cold. "What?" "I found a lab in Portland willing to fabricate results. Costs more than you'd think, but my benefactor is generous." Nolan smiled. "By tomorrow morning, official documentation will prove Mira is biologically mine. The kidnapping charges become real. Your husband's connections mean nothing against U.S. law enforcement. You'll be extradited, tried, convicted. No one will believe. Everyone will believe it, because I've spent 3 months building a paper trail that says you're obsessed with me. Unstable, dangerous. The kind of woman who'd flee the country with a child just to punish her ex-boyfriend." He leaned down again, close enough that Leora could smell coffee on his breath. "You destroyed my life when you left. Now I'm returning the favor." Leora's mind raced through scenarios, searching for leverage, for weakness, for any crack in his plan that she could exploit. "Who's backing you?" she asked. "This operation costs millions. You don't have that kind of money." "You're right. I don't. So who does?" Nolan stood and checked his watch. "Someone who wants your husband broken badly enough to fund an entire conspiracy. Someone with patience, resources, and a very long memory." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting." One of the security team, a man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, approached and spoke quietly in Korean. Nolan nodded, then turned back to Leora. "Time to move," he said. "Can you walk, or do we carry you?" Leora wanted to refuse, wanted to make them drag her every step. But the baby kicked again, stronger this time, almost frantic. And she thought about stairs, about rough handling, about all the ways resistance could hurt the daughter she was trying to protect. "I'll walk," she said. Nolan gestured, and 2 security team members hauled her upright. Her legs barely held her weight. The chloroform hangover made everything swimmy, unreal. They cut the zip ties on her ankles, but left her wrists bound behind her back. They moved her toward a service exit at the back of the warehouse. Through dirty windows, Leora could see the port beyond. Shipping containers stacked like building blocks. Cranes silhouetted against the night sky. The ocean dark and endless beyond the harbor lights. No witnesses, no cameras. No help coming. She thought about Mira asleep in their penthouse, probably dreaming peacefully while Mrs. Chen dozed in the chair beside her bed. Thought about KL realizing too late that he'd been played. Thought about the daughter growing inside her who'd never meet her father if Nolan's plan succeeded. And something inside Leora, something that had been slowly hardening over 3 years of survival, finally crystallized into something sharp enough to cut. She stopped walking. "Move," one of the security team said in accented English. "No." He grabbed her arm. Leora twisted and drove her knee into his groin with every ounce of strength she had left. He went down gasping. The other guard reached for her, and she threw her weight sideways, slamming her shoulder into his chest. Not enough to hurt him, just enough to create chaos, just enough to buy seconds. She ran. Pregnant, hands bound, still dizzy from drugs, she ran toward the warehouse entrance. Behind her, Nolan was shouting, footsteps pounding concrete. She hit the door with her shoulder and it burst open onto a loading dock overlooking the port. And there, illuminating the dock in high-beam headlights, were 6 black SUVs arranged in a semicircle. Kale stepped out of the lead vehicle. He looked like death itself had taken human form, blood on his knuckles, suit jacket torn, face carved from stone and rage. Behind him, Jinsu and her entire security team fanned out with weapons drawn, moving with the practiced precision of people who'd fought wars in alleys and boardrooms alike. Kale's eyes found Leora immediately. For 1 second, just one, his expression cracked. Relief, terror, something raw and human that he usually kept buried beneath layers of calculated control. Then the mask came back, harder than before. "Let her go," Kale said. His voice carried across the loading dock with absolute authority. "And I'll let you die quickly." Nolan appeared behind Leora with a gun pressed against her temple. The world stopped. Jinsu's team froze mid-advance. Kale's hand moved fractionally toward his own weapon, then stopped. Nobody breathed. "I don't think so," Nolan said. His voice was shaking, but the gun stayed steady. "Here's what's going to happen. Your people are going to back away. You're going to let us leave. And if anyone follows, I put a bullet in her head." "You won't," Kale said with certainty. "Why not?" "Because then you have no leverage. The second she's dead, you're dead. You're smart enough to know that." Nolan's arm tightened around Leora's neck. "Maybe I don't care anymore. Maybe watching you lose everything is worth dying for." "Then do it." Kale took 1 step forward. Just one. "Pull the trigger. See what happens." The gun pressed harder against Leora's temple. She could feel Nolan's pulse through his wrist, racing, erratic, the heartbeat of someone who'd finally realized they'd miscalculated badly. "Kyle," Leora said quietly, "don't. I'm not losing you. You might have to." "No." The word came out absolute, final. "That's not an option." Behind them, more vehicles were arriving. Port security, police, witnesses who'd forced this situation to resolve one way or another. The window was closing. Nolan felt it too. "Back away," he said again. "Now, or—" The shot came from somewhere in the stacked containers to their left. Single. Precise. Surgical. The bullet took Nolan in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. His gun fired wildly as he fell, the round punching through metal somewhere behind Leora. She dropped to the dock instinctively, rolling away from him as Jinsu's team swarmed forward. It was over in seconds. Nolan face down on concrete, screaming as someone's knee drove into his spine. His security team surrendering or running, or discovering that Jinsu had snipers positioned across 6 different vantage points. And Kale was beside Leora, cutting the zip ties on her wrists, pulling her against his chest with shaking hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was wrecked. The baby... We're okay. We're okay. I think... Leora's words dissolved into something between a laugh and a sob. How did you find me? Tracked your phone. You left it on when you went to the hospital. Kael pulled back to look at her, his hands cupping her face. Why did you go? Why didn't you wait? They said the baby was in danger. I thought... She stopped, started again. I'm sorry, I fucked up. I should have known it was a trap. You did exactly what any mother would do. Kael kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. You protected her. That's all that matters. Around them, Jinsu was coordinating cleanup. Police were being shown documentation that would satisfy their questions without revealing anything useful. Port security was being quietly paid to forget they'd seen anything. The machinery of Kael's empire was erasing this incident from official record even as it was still unfolding. Nolan was being dragged toward one of the SUVs, still screaming, not from pain, from rage, from the final understanding that he'd lost everything and gained nothing. Wait, Leora said. Kael looked at her. What? I need to talk to him. Leora, sit. Please. Something in her voice made him nod. Jinsu's team stopped dragging Nolan and held him upright instead. His shoulder was bleeding through his shirt, and his face had gone gray from shock, but his eyes still burned with bitter hatred when Leora approached. You were right about one thing, Leora said quietly. Nolan stared at her. What? I did run away. I ran because staying would have killed me. Not literally, but slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of who I used to be. She stepped closer. Close enough to see the sweat on his face, the fear finally surfacing through anger. You spent 2 years convincing me I was worthless, that needing basic human decency was asking too much, that survival meant earning your approval. I never... Miss... You did, every day, every comment, every time you made me pay rent while you focused on your startup, every time you mocked my career or isolated me from friends, or convinced me that being pregnant was a trap I'd set, instead of an accident we both participated in. Leora's voice stayed level, controlled. But here's what you never understood. I didn't need saving, I just needed space to remember who I was before you tried to erase her. Nolan's expression twisted. And now you're a Mafia wife. Congratulations. You really moved up in the world. I'm a woman who chose herself. Leora placed one hand on her pregnant belly. I chose to build a life instead of accepting the death you were offering. I chose a man who treats me like an equal instead of a possession, and I chose to survive. He's going to kill me. Probably. You could stop him. Leora looked at Nolan for a long moment. This man who'd once had the power to destroy her sense of self-worth with carefully chosen words. Who'd thrown her out while pregnant and never looked back. Who'd tracked her across the world and tried to steal everything she'd built. No, she said finally. I can't. She turned and walked back to Kael, leaving Nolan screaming threats that dissolved into begging as Jinsu's team dragged him away. Kael drove Leora to her private medical clinic 30 minutes outside Seoul. Not a hospital. Somewhere discreet, where doctors asked no questions and recorded nothing that might later surface in investigations. She was examined thoroughly, blood pressure elevated, minor contusions on her wrists, stress indicators that would require monitoring, but the baby was fine. Heartbeat strong, movement normal, no signs of distress beyond what was expected given the circumstances. She's a fighter, the doctor said in English, like her mother. Leora laughed weakly. She was lying on an examination table while Kael sat beside her holding her hand like she might disappear if he let go. She gets it from her father. The doctor left them alone after prescribing bed rest and follow-up appointments. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the distant hum of medical equipment. I need to know, Leora said finally. Who was backing Nolan? Kyle had been waiting for this question, dreading it. Someone from my past. A rival I thought I'd neutralized 5 years ago. What did you do to them? Destroyed their operation? Took their territory? Made sure they could never rebuild? And they waited 5 years for revenge? Some people have long memories. Kael's thumb traced circles on her palm. His name was Park Min-ho. He's dead now. Leora turned her head to look at him. You killed him. Jinsu did. After we made him tell us where you were. Kael met her eyes without flinching. You wanted to break me by taking you, by destroying everything I built, by proving that even monsters can lose what they love. Did he succeed? For about 30 minutes, yes. Kyle's voice went rough. Between realizing the Idlewan apartment was empty and getting the ping from your phone, I thought I'd lost you. Thought I'd been too slow, too arrogant, too convinced that my power was enough to protect you. But it was enough. Barely. They sat in silence again, processing, surviving, trying to organize trauma into something manageable. What happens to Nolan? Leora asked. Kale's expression went cold. Do you want to know? She thought about it. About the man who'd tried to steal her daughter, who'd fabricated legal documents, who'd murdered 2 security guards just to get leverage. About the fear she'd carried for 3 years that he'd somehow find her and drag her back to Portland, back to feeling worthless. No, she said. I don't want to know. I just want him gone. Then he's gone. The finality in those words should have troubled her, should have made her question what kind of person she'd become, that she could hear a death sentence and feel only relief. But Leora was tired of questioning herself, tired of apologizing for survival, tired of carrying other people's violence as her own guilt. Take me home, she said. I need to see Mira. Eek. They arrived back at the penthouse just before dawn. Sol was starting to wake up. Early commuters filling subway platforms, delivery trucks navigating narrow streets, the city's machinery grinding back into motion. Mrs. Chen met them at the door, her face tight with worry that dissolved into relief when she saw Leora. Thank God, we were so worried. I'm okay, Leora said. Is Mira still asleep? She doesn't know anything happened. Leora nearly collapsed from gratitude. The idea that her daughter had slept through this entire nightmare, blissfully unaware that her mother had been kidnapped and nearly murdered, felt like the only mercy the universe had offered all night. She went to Mira's room and stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her daughter sleep, curled on her side, clutching her stuffed rabbit, perfect and untouched by the violence that had been orchestrated around her. Kyle appeared behind Leora, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His chin rested on top of her head. She's safe, he murmured. For now. For always. Leora wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that Kyle's empire was strong enough, his reach far enough, his violence controlled enough that their family would remain protected from everyone who might want to hurt them. But she'd learned the truth tonight. Safety was an illusion. Power had limits. And the only thing standing between her daughters and the world's cruelty was the willingness to become cruel herself. I can't live like this, Leora whispered, always waiting for the next threat, always wondering if someone from your past will try to destroy us. I know. But I don't know how to leave either. Kale turned her around gently, holding her face in both hands. Then we find a third option. What option? We stop reacting. Start controlling the narrative. His eyes held something new. Not just protection, strategy. I've spent 15 years building an empire on fear and leverage, but fear makes enemies, and enemies make situations like tonight. So what do? We change what we're building. Kyle's voice carried absolute certainty. We take everything I've built, all the power, all the connections, all the resources, and we use it differently. Legitimately. Leora stared at him. You want to go legitimate? I want our daughters to inherit something other than violence. The words hung between them like a promise too fragile to survive daylight. But Kyle looked serious, looked like he'd spent the last 6 hours staring into the abyss of losing everything, and decided that whatever it took to prevent that from happening again, he'd do it. Even if it meant dismantling the empire he'd spent his entire adult life building. That's going to take years, Leora said. I know. And people are going to try to stop you. Let them try. Leora looked at her husband, this man who'd saved her life, who'd murdered for her, who was now promising to change everything he was just to give their family a different kind of future. And she realized she loved him more in this moment than any other. Not for the protection, for the choice, for choosing them over power. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Kyle kissed her then, and it felt like a beginning instead of an ending. But neither of them saw the shadow move past Mira's window 3 floors below. Neither of them saw the camera lens focused on their penthouse from the building across the street. Neither of them knew that Park Min-ho's son had been watching everything for 6 months. And revenge, as it turned out, was hereditary. The photograph arrived 3 days later. Kyle found it slipped under the penthouse door during his early morning security sweep, a habit he'd developed after the kidnapping, checking every entrance personally before Leora and Mira woke up. The envelope was unmarked. Expensive paper. No fingerprints when Jinsu's team analyzed it later. Inside was a single photo. Leora and Mira in the park, 2 blocks from their building, taken yesterday afternoon. The angle suggested a telephoto lens from at least 200 meters away. Professional surveillance, and written on the back in clean block letters, "She has his eyes." Kyle stared at the photograph for 30 seconds while his world recalibrated around this new threat. Park Min-ho was dead. Kyle had watched Jinsu put 2 bullets in his chest after extracting Leora's location, had personally verified the body before it was disposed of in ways that ensured no investigation would ever find remains. But dead men couldn't send photographs, which meant someone else was watching. Someone patient enough to wait until the immediate crisis passed before announcing their presence. Someone smart enough to know that the photograph itself was more effective than any explicit threat. Kale called Jinsu while the photo was still in his hand. "We have a problem," he said. By noon, Kyle's entire security apparatus was operating at wartime readiness. Surveillance teams deployed across a 5-kilometer radius around the penthouse. Facial recognition software scanning every camera feed in Seoul for patterns. Background checks running on anyone who'd had contact with Park Min-ho in the last decade. Jinsu coordinating from the command center while Hana worked her network of informants across the city's criminal underworld. And Leora sat in the living room watching all of it unfold with the hollow expression of someone who'd finally reached their breaking point. "This is never going to end," she said quietly. Kale looked up from his laptop. They were alone in the room. Mira was napping, Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen preparing lunch, security agents were posted throughout the penthouse. But somehow the isolation felt absolute. "We'll find who sent it," Kyle said. "And then what?" Another person appears. Another threat. Another crisis. Leora's hands rested on her pregnant belly, fingers tracing absent patterns. "How many enemies do you have?" "Fewer every year. Because you kill them." The accusation sat between them like a third presence. Kyle closed his laptop carefully, buying time to choose his words with precision. "Yes," he said finally. "Because I kill them, or neutralize them, or make them wish they'd never learned my name. That's what survival looks like in my world." "Our world," Leora corrected. "I'm in this now. Mira's in this. Our unborn daughter is in this. We don't get to pretend there's separation anymore." "I know." "Then tell me how this ends. Tell me what the exit strategy is." Her voice was climbing toward something that wasn't quite hysteria, but was close enough to terrify him. "Because I can't keep living like this. Can't keep waiting for the next photograph, the next kidnapping, the next time someone decides the best way to hurt you is through us." Kael crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "I'm going to fix this." "How?" "By doing what I should have done years ago." He met her eyes with absolute certainty. "I'm going to end it. All of it. Every connection to the underworld, every criminal operation, every piece of my empire that puts you and our daughters at risk." Leora stared at him. "You can't just walk away." "That's not how this works." "No, but I can burn it down." Kael's voice carried the weight of a decision that had been crystallizing since the moment he'd found Leora on that loading dock. "Everything I've built, the legitimate and the illegal, I'm going to dismantle it systematically, pay off debts, sever connections, make sure that when we're done, there's nothing left for anyone to target. That'll take months, maybe years. Then it takes years. And in the meantime, we disappear." The words hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown across dark water. Leora searched his face for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was another empty promise made under pressure. She found none. "Where would we go?" she asked. "I don't know yet. Somewhere no one's looking. Somewhere we can raise our daughters without armed guards and surveillance cameras." Kael squeezed her hands gently. "Somewhere you can breathe again." Leora wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that escape was possible, that they could simply leave and build something new somewhere else. But she'd learned too much about Kael's world to accept easy answers. What about the person who sent the photograph? She asked. Jinsu will handle it. Handle it how? Kael's expression went cold. However she needs to. Before Leora could respond, Jinsu herself appeared in the doorway. Her face was tight with the kind of controlled tension that meant bad news. We found him, she said. His name was Park Ji-hoon, 23 years old, Park Min-ho's only son. He'd been living in Tokyo for the past 5 years, building a legitimate career as a photographer, while quietly nursing rage that had been growing since his father's empire collapsed. He's not a professional, Jinsu explained during the emergency briefing. No military training, no criminal connections, just a kid who blames you for destroying his family. Then why is he good enough to evade our surveillance? Kael asked. Because he's patient. He's been watching you for 6 months, learning patterns, waiting for the right moment. Jinsu pulled up security footage showing a young man with a camera bag moving through Seoul's streets. He knows we're looking for professional threats. Military contractors. Organized operations. He's none of those things. He's just angry. Anger makes people dangerous, which is why we need to handle this now. Hana leaned forward, her hands flat on the conference table. He's staying at a hostel in Hongdae. 4th floor, north-facing window. We can have a team there in 20 minutes. Kael studied the photograph of Park Ji-hoon on the screen. Young face, his father's eyes, the kind of ordinary that made him invisible in crowds. Does he have weapons? Kael asked. Unknown, probably not. His background suggests he's not a killer. Yet. The word carried weight. Everyone in the room understood that normal people became killers under the right circumstances. Grief, rage, desperation. The same forces that had transformed Kael from a street kid into an underworld king could push Park Ji-hoon toward violence he'd never imagined himself capable of. What do you want us to do? Jinsu asked. Kael was quiet for a long moment. The old version of himself would have given the order without hesitation. Eliminate the threat permanently. Make sure Park Ji-hoon joined his father in whatever unmarked grave held their family legacy. But the new version, the one trying to build something different for his daughters, hesitated. I want to talk to him, Kael said finally. Jinsu and Hana exchanged glances. That's a mistake, Hana said bluntly. You give him an audience, you give him opportunity. Maybe, but I need to know if there's a way to end this without more bodies. There isn't. Then I need to hear him say it. Jinsu studied Kael's face with the intensity of someone who'd known him long enough to read his tells. You're really doing this. The whole legitimate exit strategy. Yes, it's going to cost you everything. Not everything. Kael glanced toward the living room where Leora was visible through the doorway, holding Mira on her lap while reading a picture book. Just the things that don't matter anymore. They brought Park Ji-hoon to a neutral location, a shuttered restaurant in Itaewon that Kael owned through shell companies buried deep enough that no investigation would find them. 2 security teams outside. Jinsu and Hana positioned strategically inside, and Kael sitting alone at a table near the back while evening light filtered through dusty windows. Park Ji-hoon arrived under escort, wrists bound in front of him, looking more confused than scared. He was smaller than Kael expected, thinner, the kind of build that came from missing meals and sleeping poorly. Grief had hollowed him out from the inside. Sit, Kael said in Korean. Ji-hoon sat. His eyes darted around the room, cataloging exits, calculating odds. Smart enough to be scared, not smart enough to hide it. Do you know why you're here? Kael asked. Because you're going to kill me like you killed my father. Probably. But I wanted to give you a chance to explain yourself first. Ji-hoon's expression twisted. Explain what? That I watched you destroy everything my family built? That I've spent 5 years watching you live in luxury while we lost our home, our money, our reputation? That your wife gets to raise her daughters in safety while mine had to work 3 jobs just to survive? Your father tried to have my wife kidnapped and murdered, Kael said quietly. He funded an operation designed to destroy my family. What did you think would happen? He was trying to get back what you stole. I didn't steal anything. I competed. I won. That's how this world works. You destroyed him. He tried to destroy me first. Kael leaned forward slightly. 5 years ago, your father orchestrated an attack on one of my operations. 3 people died. Good people. loyal people, people who had families. His voice stayed level but carried edge underneath. I responded proportionally, dismantled his network, took his territory, made sure he could never rebuild. That's not theft. That's consequence. Ji-hun's jaw tightened. So you think you're justified? I think I'm realistic. Your father played a dangerous game and lost. That's not my fault. And now I'm supposed to what? Accept that? Move on? Pretend my family wasn't destroyed by your ambition? No. Kael sat back. I think you're supposed to decide whether revenge is worth dying for. The words settled between them like stones dropping into deep water. Ji-hun stared at Kael with the expression of someone who'd spent months imagining this confrontation and was now discovering it didn't match the fantasy. You sent the photograph, Kael continued. You wanted me to know you were watching, that you could hurt my family the same way I hurt yours. So here's your chance. Tell me your plan. Tell me what you were going to do. Ji-hun looked down at his bound hands. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. I don't know. You don't know? I wanted you to feel what I felt. The fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that someone you love is vulnerable and you can't protect them. He looked up and his eyes were wet. But I'm not like you. I'm not a killer. I'm just angry. Anger fades. Not this kind. Kael studied the young man across from him, saw his father's features, saw the rage that had been burning for 5 years without outlet, saw someone who'd spent so long nurturing vengeance that it had become identity. I'm going to give you 2 options, Kael said finally. The first is simple. You leave Korea tonight. Never come back. Never contact my family again. Never speak my name. In exchange, you get to keep living. Build a life somewhere else. Eventually, maybe the anger fades enough that you can breathe again. And the second option? You keep pursuing this. Keep planning whatever revenge you think you're owed. And I respond the way I've always responded to threats. Kael's expression was empty of emotion. You die, quietly, permanently, in a way that ensures no one ever asks questions. Ji-hun was trembling now, not from fear, from the collision of reality against fantasy. That's not a choice. It's the only one you're getting. You killed my father. Your father tried to kill my wife while she was pregnant with my daughter. He murdered 2 security guards just to create leverage. He orchestrated a conspiracy designed to destroy everything I built. Kael's voice finally carried edge. I did what I had to do to protect my family, just like you're doing what you think you have to do to honor yours. The difference is, I have the power to make my choices stick. The truth of that statement was undeniable. They both knew it. Ji-hun slumped in his chair, looking suddenly younger than his 23 years. I wanted him to be proud of me, he said quietly. Even after he died, I wanted to finish what he started. He wouldn't be proud. He'd be terrified that you threw your life away for revenge that won't change anything. How do you know? Because I've killed men for revenge. It never makes you feel better, just emptier. Silence stretched between them. Outside, Seoul continued its endless rhythm. Inside the shuttered restaurant, 2 men sat across from each other, representing different responses to the same grief. Option 1, Ji-hun said finally, voice hollow. I'll take option 1. Kael nodded. Smart choice. But I want you to know something first. What? Ji-hun met his eyes with something that wasn't quite courage, but was close enough. You're not a good man. You don't get to pretend that protecting your family makes you righteous. You've destroyed people, ruined lives. My father wasn't innocent, but neither are you. I know. The admission seemed to surprise Ji-hun. Then why do you keep doing it? Because the alternative is losing everything I love. Kael stood. Maybe that makes me a monster, but I'd rather be a monster who gets to hold his daughters than a good man who has to bury them. He gestured to Jinsu, who moved forward to escort Ji-hun out. The young man stood on unsteady legs, looking like someone who'd just survived drowning. Where will I go? He asked. Anywhere but here. Kael pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table. There's money, enough to start over somewhere else. Use it. Ji-hun stared at the envelope like it was a snake. Why? Because you're not your father, and I'm trying to be better than mine. Leora was waiting when Kael returned to the penthouse 3 hours later. She'd put Mira to bed and was sitting in the living room with a cup of tea gone cold in her hands. The moment she saw his face, she knew the threat was over. "He's gone?" she asked. "On a flight to Vancouver. Jinsu's people will monitor him for 6 months, make sure he stays gone. After that, he's just another person trying to survive." Leora set down her tea and crossed the room to him. "You let him live. I gave him a choice. He chose correctly. That's not what you would have done a year ago. A year ago, I didn't know what I know now." Kael pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair. "That killing him wouldn't have protected you. It would have just created space for the next threat. So what will protect us? Distance. Disappearance. Becoming people no one's looking for." They stood like that for a long time, while Sol glowed through the windows. Eventually, Leora pulled back to look at him. "When do we leave?" she asked. 3 months, maybe 4. I need time to liquidate assets, sever connections, make sure there's nothing left that ties back to us. Where are we going? I was thinking New Zealand. Small town on the South Island, mountains and ocean. No one who knows our names." Leora laughed softly. It sounded like relief. "You really want to be a normal person. I want our daughters to grow up somewhere they don't need armed guards. What about everything you built here? I'm burning it down, all of it." Kael's voice carried finality. "By the time we leave, Kael Vesper won't exist anymore. Just a man named David Chen who moves to New Zealand with his wife and daughters to start over." "David Chen? You have a better suggestion?" "No, I just..." Leora smiled. "I never thought I'd see you run away from anything." "I'm not running away. I'm running towards something better." The distinction felt important. Leora kissed him then, and it tasted like possibility instead of fear. 4 months later, they left Seoul on a commercial flight to Auckland. No private jet, no security detail. Just a family of 4 with 2 checked bags and carry-on stuffed with children's books. Kael wore jeans and a plain t-shirt that made him look like any other tired father traveling with young children. Leora held their newborn daughter, Hana, named after the woman who'd helped protect them, while Mira slept against Kael's shoulder. Jinsu and Marcus and the rest of Kael's inner circle had been paid off generously and scattered across continents with instructions never to contact him again. The penthouse had been sold to a tech executive who'd never know about the violence that had soaked into its walls. Every business, every connection, every piece of evidence that Kael Vesper had ever existed had been systematically erased. On paper, they were nobody. In practice, they were free. The flight was 14 hours. Leora spent most of it watching Kael with their daughters, seeing a version of him that had probably always existed beneath the violence but had never had space to emerge. Gentle, patient, fully present in ways that power had never allowed. They landed in Auckland on a clear morning that smelled like ocean salt and freedom, rented a car, and drove south through landscapes that looked like Earth had been remade by someone who believed in second chances, mountains that touched clouds, valleys green enough to hurt your eyes, oceans stretching toward horizons that promised nothing but space. Their new home was a small house on the outskirts of Queenstown, 3 bedrooms, a garden that needed work, views of Lake Wakatipu that made Leora cry the first time she saw them. No neighbors close enough to ask questions, no history, no ghosts, just a family starting over. The first 3 months were adjustment, learning to live without security, without surveillance, without the constant low-level terror that had become background noise in Seoul. Kael struggled with it more than Leora expected. He'd spent 15 years sleeping with one eye open, and the habits died hard. But gradually, imperceptibly, he softened, started smiling more often, laughed at Mira's terrible toddler jokes, held Hana for hours while she slept, just breathing her in, helped Leora plant vegetables in the garden even though he didn't know the first thing about gardening. They became ordinary, and ordinary was beautiful. One evening, 6 months after arriving, they sat on their back porch watching the sun set over the lake. Mira was inside watching cartoons. Hana was asleep in her crib. The world was quiet in ways that Seoul had never been. "Do you miss it?" Leora asked. Kael knew what she meant. Sometimes. The power. The certainty of knowing I could solve problems with money or violence. But this is better. He reached over and took her hand. "I'd rather raise our daughters here than rule an empire there." Leora squeezed his fingers. No regrets? Only one. What? That it took me so long to realize what actually mattered. They sat in silence while the light faded and stars emerged one by one. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future felt like something to anticipate instead of survive. Tax. 2 years later, Leora was working at a local medical clinic when she saw him. Just a glimpse through the waiting room window. A young man with a camera, photographing the mountains in the distance. Something about his profile made her freeze. Park Ji-hoon. He was older, healthier. The hollowed-out grief had filled in with something that looked like contentment. He seemed to sense her watching and turned. Their eyes met through glass. For 3 seconds, neither moved. Then Ji-hoon nodded once, acknowledgement, maybe respect, and walked away down the street. Leora didn't tell Kyle. Some threats dissolved on their own when you stopped feeding them attention. And besides, she'd seen Ji-hoon's camera bag, seen the way he'd been photographing mountains instead of people, seen someone who'd chosen to build a life instead of nursing rage. They'd both survived. That was enough. 5 years after leaving Seoul, Kyle stood in their garden while Mira and Hana played in the grass. They were 8 and 5 now. Growing fast. Mira had her father's intensity but her mother's kindness. Hana had inherited Leora's stubborn resilience and Kyle's rare smile. Neither of them knew their father had once been one of the most dangerous men in Asia. Neither of them needed to. Leora joined him, slipping her hand into his. What are you thinking about? How different everything could have been. Better or worse? Just different. Kyle watched their daughters chase each other through sunlight that turned their hair gold. I don't think about Seoul much anymore. Me neither. But sometimes I wonder who we'd be if we'd stayed. Dead, probably. Leora said it lightly, but they both knew it was true. You can't fight forever. Eventually, something catches up. We caught up first. We got lucky. No. Kale pulled her closer. We chose each other. That's not luck. That's just us refusing to give up. Leora leaned into him, and they stood like that while their daughters played and the mountains stood eternal, and the lake reflected clouds that promised rain but delivered only beauty. Years later, when people asked Leora how she'd survived, she never mentioned the kidnapping or the violence or the empire they'd escaped. She just said she'd learned the difference between love and possession, that she'd married a dangerous man who chose to become safe, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from power and toward the people who make you want to be better, and that she was never hard to love. She just needed to find someone willing to prove it. The story of Kyle Vesper ended in Seoul, but the story of David and Leora Chen, 2 ordinary people raising daughters in a small New Zealand town, was just beginning. And that story had a much better ending.